This ESPN podcast is brought to you by Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. Visit geico.com.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects. The BS Report. The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. I'm having internet problems. I called in on the phone, and our guest is on a really nice business Skype connection. It's almost like he's hosting the podcast. Bob Voulgaris, he's been on the pod before, famous gambler, great Twitter feed. A pseudo-savant. I'm going to call you a pseudo-savant, because savant makes it seem like there's something wrong.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. All right. But I don't think savant makes it seem like there's something wrong. I think that people add idiot to that in front of it, and that's what makes it wrong. But
that's why I didn't do it. So we're heading in the stretch run here. First thing, I was filling out my awards ballot. They give me an awards ballot for some reason. And I thought one of the most interesting conundrums was the first team All-NBA guard spots, because you know Durant and you know LeBron are the forwards and Joakim Noah is the center. But guards, yep. Chris Paul, James Harden, Stephen Curry, I can only pick two. Which ones would you have picked?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I would probably, I would put Harden in there for sure. And then I would probably go with Chris Paul. Although I think that it could be someone else I would add in addition to the conversation.
Okay, who's that?
Dragic for Phoenix.
I think he was on my second team, and I put Curry in the second team. I put Chris Paul in the first team, even though he missed 19 games, and even though they did play well without him, I just felt like he's so good on both ends. And the thing with Curry and Damian Lillard, even to a more alarming degree, is just the defensive tax that they cost for their teams. Curry's in an ideal situation because he has Iguodala, who, in my opinion, is in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year. But my instincts are right on that, right? Like, Curry is a liability defensively.
Yeah, he's a bad defender. I mean, he's just very slight in build. It makes it makes it tough for him to really stay in front of players, and he can't really body them when players get down low in the post a little bit. Although I'm not a big fan of posting up guards to begin with.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's in a good situation though, because like I said, he's got Iguodala and then he's got Bogut right behind him. So if you do get past Curry, so I think part of it is their defense allows him the ability to kind of funnel guards a little bit towards Bogut, which is one of the reasons why people are talking about how much better the Warriors are when David Lee is out, because just the style they play is to allow that penetration from the guards, and they don't really force Curry to do a great job of stopping guard penetration.
Yeah.
And when Lee's in there, it really magnifies the situation, because Lee is really not good at players that are going to the rim and attacking. He's not good at doing the verticality thing. He's not good at protecting the paint. He's not even really good at like backpedaling and showing on the pick and rolls or anything like that. So, but yeah, I would agree with you. It is tough to put Curry in there because he is pretty deficient on one side of the ball, whereas Chris Paul is a good defender. He gets a lot of steals, which are important. He doesn't over gamble for those steals, which is even more important. And when he's locked in and when he's angry, when he doesn't like another player, or when the other player is going at him at one end defensively and he decides he wants to pick it up a little bit, he can be a really, really terrorizing defender.
We're aligned on Dragic, and so I'm not handing him my ballot until the last day, because for the MVP, I think the first three spots are obvious. The fourth spot I gave to Joakim Noah, which I also felt was pretty obvious. But the fifth spot's wide open. Are you against Joakim Noah for the fourth spot?
For the fourth spot of MVP of the league?
Yeah. No,
I mean, he needs to be in the conversation. It's pretty hard to go outside of Durant. I mean, I think Durant's the MVP this year.
No question.
Yeah, I think he's just, I mean, the stuff he's kind of flown under the radar a little bit with the stuff he's done, where the point scoring streak, the team has just done really well despite injuries. He's kind of just quietly been an assassin the whole year.
It's one of the great offensive seasons in the history of the forward position. And I actually don't think we've made enough of a fuss about it. I don't know if we're ever going to see anything like this again.
No, everyone's kind of there's been so many other storylines in the NBA, whether it's San Antonio doing a really good job and people are shocked at that, the Indiana, Miami completely running away with the East and then collapsing. Now that's a big storyline. People have kind of forgotten about fact that Durant has just showed up for every game this year for the most part and just played spectacular.
Yeah, so I had him for MVP. I had him 1. I had LeBron 2. I had Blake Griffin 3. Noah 4. And then the 5th spot, if Dirk doesn't make the playoffs, I'm going to give it to Dirk just because I don't understand how that Dallas team is going to win 50 games. And I just feel like he gets any sort of ancillary credit goes to him and Carlisle for the roster they have versus the win-loss record. But if they don't make it, I would seriously, it's really between Dragic and Harden for me for that 5th spot. Because I think both those guys, night after night after night, for what they mean at crunch time, I give them a slight edge over Curry. Would you put Paul George in that conversation anymore or no?
No, I'm like, I was the biggest, I started the Paul George super fan club back early last year. It took a little while for it to pick up some steam. And then once they eliminated the Knicks in the playoffs, we got a pretty big bandwagon going. And I have never fallen out of I've never had a player fallen out of my like top player list quicker than him. I mean, I'm just not even a fan anymore, to the point where I actually enjoy watching him and just going, what is wrong with him? So I wouldn't put Paul George in that conversation at all, not even close. I mean, it seems like he's completely lost his mind for some reason since the All-Star break. I'm not sure what has happened to that team. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit, but
yeah, I had an issue with him I ended up, right now I have him penciled in for second team All-NBA for the forward spot. I was going to give it to Kevin Love, but I was thinking as bad as Paul George has been offensively for the last 2 months, like Kevin Love is that bad defensively every game.
Yeah.
So,
and George's offensive struggles have, they're obviously there, and the team struggles, but he still is playing good defense.
Yeah.
It's not like he's taken off on defense. It's bizarre. I don't know exactly what has happened to that team. I mean, I know a little bit I got some theories behind it.
Let's hear them.
Well, I started this very early on. I started talking about how crazy it was that I get that Indiana really wanted to get the number 1 seed. I agreed with that. I felt like home court advantage was very important for them in the playoffs. But I didn't understand why they were playing their players so many minutes. You had guys out there, whoring for triple doubles in 30-point blowouts, 25-point blowouts, just playing minutes they didn't need to play. And I think if you look at the number of starters they've used and the number of players they've played, that's a big part of it. I don't think you can tax your players that much all season, make them play that many minutes. Then when the All-Star break comes, these are guys who are used to having an All-Star break. Now they're doing publicity, they're shooting commercials, they're playing in the All-Star game. And on top of that, they're starting to believe the hype that they're superstars. Yep. So I think that's a part of it. The other part of it, of course, is the fact that their team chemistry is just very hard to define and quantify. And I think if there's one thing we can be certain of, there hasn't been a very good history of Andrew Bynum being added to rosters, whether he's played or not, and those teams performing well after he's been there.
Yeah.
I don't know how many negative wins a game having him sitting on the bench looking like he's disgusted with life is worth. Just having that guy around. And then, of course, the Evan Turner trade, losing Granger for Turner, has been bad. So all those things put together, I think, are part of it. But for me, the big factor is, and I started on this really early, is they were just playing too many minutes that didn't need to be played. These are the things that the really smart teams understand, how many minutes their players optimally should be playing. And it's clearly something that Indiana didn't believe in. And I think they're paying for it right now. I think they're just getting burnt out. I think LeBron's experiencing that a little bit too, by the way. I think LeBron's played far too many minutes this year for no particular reason. He hasn't got any of the rest days that Wade has gotten. And I'm a little bit worried about that for the Heat, because I don't think you can continue. They've had 3 straight finals runs, tossed in an Olympics in between. And now he's basically played the entire season this year as well.
Those are 2 things that I talked about on Wednesday's countdown. I'm just perplexed that they are so concerned about taking care of Wade's body and pacing him and making sure he's okay and giving him rest and giving him time. And yet they're just throwing LeBron out there game after game after game with the biggest burden to anybody in the league. It's bizarre.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous because it's not even like he's out there. He's usually defending the other team's best player.
Yep.
He's always bringing the ball up the court. He's not playing point, but he is playing point. Whenever the shot clock bogs down and they need to get something, the ball immediately goes back to him. So he's not only playing lots of minutes, he's actually, he's not just standing in the corner like Batty or like Chalmers, who doesn't even bring the ball. He's bringing the ball up the court. He's defending the other team's best player. And he's played so many games. It's really crazy. I mean, it's almost unfair because we just expect so much. No one else would have that type of expectation, I don't think. No one else would be expected to do all of that. But he is, and we just take him for granted in some ways.
Well, and it's not just this season because, they've had 300-game seasons. And
exactly,
he did more in the last two playoffs, the two they won, than anyone I've ever seen on a basketball court from a responsibility standpoint. I mean, he was playing 44 minutes a game. He was guarding Tony Parker, and then he was doing everything offensively in the other end. And we just take it for granted. But, it's year 11 for this guy, and he's probably put on, almost an extra season if you think about, just the pressure of those playoff games. And, something like Game 6 or Game 7 in the finals, that's not worth a game. That's two or three games worth of abuse on your body with the pressure. Yeah. I do think they're pushing it.
Yeah, he's played 38 minutes a game this year, and he's played in 75 games, which is insane. I mean, Bosch has played every game, 77 games, or nearly every game, and he's only, he's playing almost 6 fewer minutes. So, it'll be interesting. I guess the thing that they have going for them is the first round of the playoffs is just going to be, in their mind, a cakewalk.
Yep.
Right? But I don't think the second round anymore is going to be nearly the cakewalk that they thought it would be. In fact, if they get the number 1 seed and are forced to play Brooklyn or Chicago in the second round, especially Chicago, that is going to be a very, very physically taxing, tough series for them.
Both of them. Brooklyn beat them every time, and I don't think Brooklyn can beat them in a series, but they do bring some matchup issues to the table that it's not a team that they're just going to blow out game after game. The size of that Brooklyn team is hard for them.
Well, it's very hard for them, and if you have time, we can talk about that a little bit.
Let's do it. I have lots of time.
A part of it is just the style of defense that Miami plays that is so suffocating doesn't really apply to the style of offense that Brooklyn plays. Brooklyn isn't a huge pick and roll team when they play Miami. They post up Livingston. They post up, they post up
Joe Johnson,
Williams. And they have Garnett initiating from the post, extended. And so it really takes away a lot of the strength of Miami's defense. And then on top of that, Miami's not that big to begin with. So if, their big edge on defense that Miami has, and one of the reasons why they're so good defensively, is they just really work hard on those pick and rolls. They completely blitz it, push it all the way out. Everyone reacts and moves and is turning. But if you're not running pick and rolls, you don't really have to worry about Miami's speed. Now you can just focus on their size. And most teams suck at post-ups, but Brooklyn actually is a pretty good post-up team. In fact, I think Sean Livingston might be the best. He might be leading the league in post-ups this year, in successful post-ups, point per post-up or something. I thought I looked at that earlier and was kind of shocked. So that is just a huge advantage. And then on the other side of the ball, a lot of the speed stuff that Miami does that really confounds other teams it's just a perfect matchup. They're both going to play really, really small. It's going to be interesting. I'm not saying Brooklyn can beat them for sure, but I think that people will sleep on them, and I think that it's going to be a very tough series, and it could go 7 games. We'll see.
Well, and the other part with Brooklyn and definitely Chicago is neither of those teams will be afraid of Miami, and I do think that's a big part of playing them. You like Pierce and Garnett look at Miami with disdain. Even now, even Garnett at his advanced age and Pierce at his advanced age really have real contempt for Miami and feel like they can beat them. And I think Chicago with Noah and Thibodeau and some of the other guys in that team who've been through the wars against some of these Miami games, that's not a team that's going to be afraid of them either. So at the very least, it's a tough round too.
Yep. And then you got to go round 3. Round actually might be tougher in some ways than they've probably ever had in the second round of the playoffs in their run. I mean, I know that they've gone through some stretches before. The first time they played Indiana in the playoffs. Yeah. That was a little bit tougher. Not the first time, but not last year, but the year before was a little bit tough on them. But that was mostly because Bosch got injured more than anything.
The problem with Miami, and the problem I think when you're looking at, you're building out the advanced metrics for them and trying to figure out what their ceiling is and things like that, not you, but just anybody, is out of anybody, even they've had this for 3 years, they have that on-off switch.
Yep.
So their ceiling, I think, is still higher than anybody's ceiling other than Oklahoma City. But they can't hit that ceiling very often. And the reality is they always seem to have to summon that strength just to get there. And last year, it almost cost them the title.
Right.
This year, they're going to have to do it for 3 rounds unless they luck out and get, I mean, God bless Toronto. But if it's Miami, Toronto in the conference finals, I think that's a huge break for Miami.
I'm not buying the Toronto. Look, they're a good team. They play well. But I'm not buying the fact that they're the team you got to be worried about in the playoffs. Only because they're a young team. They haven't been there before.
Nah.
For them, I feel like just getting to the playoffs makes them feel like they've arrived. I mean, who on that roster has any playoff experience?
Well, if they won 2 rounds and got to the conference finals, it would be already they won the championship.
Yeah, and I don't think that I mean, it depends on where they match up. If they can avoid, I just don't see them. They have a chance to beat Indiana, I suppose, if they can somehow get that matchup, if they get the 2-3, which it looks like they will.
Yeah.
But if they somehow had a situation where Chicago jumped ahead of them and now they had to play Chicago in the second round or some, I don't think that, they're not beating Miami. There's no way they're going to beat Miami. And I'm not convinced that they can beat Indiana.
Would you say that anyone that plays Indiana, with the exception of Atlanta or the Knicks, could potentially beat Indiana in a series just because Indiana could beat itself in a series?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, look, they're playing terrible. I agree. It's not just, they've fallen off and they're not as sharp. Since the All-Star break, they've been a very mediocre team.
Yeah.
So, and they don't strike me as the type of team that has an on-off switch, because their on-off switch is not like Miami, where it's predicated upon talent. It's predicated upon their system and working hard. The one thing I find that's shocking about the way they're playing is I was watching this. They really, on offense, they haven't set a solid screen in a month, I don't think. And that's the type of stuff that it's so easy to coach and look, we have to set effective screens. But the fact that they know this and they haven't been able to do it just shows me that the team just doesn't seem to care. Or if they care, they don't know what they need to do to make things happen. Their offense is so sloppy that, I mean, David West literally cannot set a screen. Scola, when he goes out there, doesn't set a screen. And Hibbert is oftentimes so disgusted that he's not getting the ball in the post that when he's asked to come out and set a screen, he kind of lackluster moves out there. So it's pretty scary. If I'm that team, and I'm sure they are, I'm not thinking that, we can just turn this on. I mean, they're looking for ways to make it happen, but I just don't see it. I mean, their offense has been terrible since the All-Star break.
You talked about some of the factors that you thought were a problem. I would add these two. One, they built that entire team and their season around the premise that their top 5 guys played great together. And all the advanced metrics last year and all the lineup stats for just 5-man units, and they were like staggeringly good. And that was the best case for them last year to maybe beat Miami. And now you watch them and it's like the 5 guys are playing terribly together. Mm-hmm. And they seem slow. It doesn't seem like they like playing with each other. It feels like Lance has thrown the calibration off because he's trying to do a little too much. Paul George is taking shots he's never taken until the last 4 months. And they just don't look right. And that's the one team that couldn't afford a 5-man unit that used to be good to not be as good because they don't really have another alternative. Like, what are they going to do?
Yeah. I'll tell you something. They are a negative, point differential, right? Everyone talks about point differential, the number of points you score versus the number of points you've given up. Since March 1st, they're at -5 points a game. That puts you on par with the Celtics for the entire season are at -4.6.
Yeah, and it was the opposite before then. So I think that was one problem. And then the other one is something, this is just an intangible thing, but we talked about this on the show a little on Wednesday night, where you don't really know what you are until you have some adversity. And I thought of this when LeBron was talking. LeBron had kind of a little dig toward them about, he was talking, somebody was asking about Indiana, what's going on, and he basically said, hey, I don't feel bad for those guys. We went through more hell in 2011 than any team ever. And
right.
if these guys can't handle this, you got to be kidding me. This is his basic takeaway. You know what? He's right. Like, what adversity does this Indiana team really had? Like Paul George, you were on TMZ a couple times, and Brett Herbert's upset because he's not getting the ball. Like, this isn't real adversity, and they're folding anyway.
Yeah, it's all self-created adversity. It's kind of interesting to watch. There's all these. I've tweeted some of these pictures on my Twitter feed of just like what Paul George is wearing. I mean, this isn't having to do this, but it just goes to show you the guys. He looked like he was. He's wearing like some leather outfit, and then there's the picture of them where they've got their shirts off, and they're all sweaty, and it's like a weird. I don't know. It just seemed like they worked so hard at their image of being cool and being part of, we've arrived, we're here, when really they haven't. I mean, getting to Game 7 of a conference finals doesn't mean anything, really.
Right. Against a tired Miami team that had a banged up Dwayne Wade. And
not just getting to Game 7, but getting to Game 7 and getting blown out in Game 7.
Yep. The streak at the beginning of the year didn't help them. I think, what were they, like 18-1? And then that
they were playing awesome. I mean, it was, but it's, the cool thing about the basketball season, it's like a horse race or a marathon, whatever you want to call it. And the players who are playing who peak too early, or the teams that peak too early. If you look at the Spurs, they've been the team that's really rested all their players, and some people think it's because of how old they are, and that's definitely a factor. But I think even if Popovich had a younger team, he would be resting these players the same amount of minutes. And that's a big reason why the Spurs at the end of every year go on these big streaks and do well and surprise people. And that's because they really treat the season as, your goal is the playoffs, is to play great at the playoffs, not to blow teams out in the first month of the season.
He's really the only one who has 100% figured out the regular season. I feel like he's mastered it. And I don't think it's an accident that, somebody like Duncan is in year 18 after 4 college years and still is running around like he's 30. And I don't think it's an accident that Ginobili, who looked washed up last year, they've actually been able to coax out a potential 6th man of the year. Yeah, I had him second. A performance from him like that when he really looked like he was done. And I'm amazed that these other coaches just don't look at what Popovich does and say to themselves, you know what? Maybe I should just emulate what this guy does. I don't think this is rocket science. It's
interesting because they were the first team to really figure out the value of the corner three. And they had like a 3-year head start on that. And then everyone started talking about, analytics is caught up. Everyone knows the value of each point on the floor. And all these other teams have figured it out. The Rockets have figured this out. These other teams have figured it out. And now their edge is gone. But he's come up with another bit that no one else has really figured. There's not one player on the Spurs roster who's averaging more than 30 minutes a game.
Yeah.
And they've got, I think, 10 players who have started more than 10 games, which is insane.
I asked him about it.
Kawhi Leonard is young and is averaging 29 minutes a game. That's it's great.
I asked him about it. When we announced that Laker game, me and Jalen, we spent 15 minutes with him, which was really cool. And I asked him, I was like, it really seems like you're using wacky lineups this year. Like, is that intentional? And he was kind of excited that somebody asked him about it. He's like, yeah. Last year we were surprised in the finals, that we had to just play exclusively small ball. And I realized that we hadn't tried enough lineups, and I wasn't really positive what was going to work and not work. And this year I really wanted to try every kind of lineup. So when we get to the playoffs, we have to play these different styles. I'll be ready with different lineups. And I was thinking wow, that's really smart. Yeah. I don't know how many coaches would even think to do that.
It's he's got the luxury of the fact that he's got a very smart team. And the other thing is the culture that they have there, which I don't think can be replicated. We talk about Indiana and how they were, you had Lance Stevenson in there chasing a triple-double and a 30-point win in a game. I mean, Kawhi Leonard basically is not getting any individual accolades at all. And he seems to be okay with it. And that's really tough, I think, in this day and age where players are really, living in, there's social media, there's publicity, there's ability for endorsements. For him just to be quietly saying, okay, I'll play under 30 minutes a game. I'll not really go after a bunch of individual stats or get any type of endorsement deals or anything like that. But we're going to be there at the end of the season. We're going to be playing. I think that's very tough. That's probably the toughest thing about coaching. And I think a lot of it is the players just look at him and rightly so. They just think of him as almost like a god, Popovich. I mean, he's deserved everything. Any bit of respect he gets, he deserves, and probably more. And so I think it's tough for a new coach to come in there and tell a player, we're only going to play you 25 minutes a game, especially if it's like a contract year or something like that for this player. These players, some players would go insane with that type of suggestion. So it's kind of, it's really, I mean, he is the greatest coach that the NBA has ever seen, in my opinion. I know people talk about Phil Jackson. He's great as well, but I'm a Popovich guy. He's done more with less for a longer period of time. And you never see the collapses either. That is, when his teams get eliminated from the playoffs, they don't get eliminated in like a ridiculous fashion where they start questioning each other, or there's never been turmoil with the Spurs. You've never heard of inner turmoil. And part of it is the players they pick, and part of it is the fact that the players buy in really quickly.
And part of it's the background of the guys they pick. I think they really do that stuff carefully. I have a theory. I think they love taking guys who, are from different parts of the world and have had different life experiences, because it seems, I told this story when Jalen and I taped a whole bunch of stuff for Grantland next week about a playoff preview. So we told this story, but I'm repeating it. We had drinks with Avery Johnson after a show once, and the Spurs were in town, and he was going to meet them at 11 o'clock for a steak dinner. And we were like, that's cool. It's like you're still on the team. I'm like making fun of him. And he's like, no, you don't understand. You're always on the team with the Spurs. Like, anyone who passes through that circle is there. And it's like, if you're in town and they're in town, like, you're invited. You get to go. And I thought that was cool too. Like, how many teams have created something like that?
Sure. Yeah, it's I mean, you could talk about Popovich forever, because he's just, he's just done so much in such a small period of time, and recently, especially with the advent of analytics. But yeah, the players they pick, but they've also had, look at how many times they've had good draft picks. They had Duncan once, number 1 overall. That was obviously pretty good. But then I think Ginobili went like 57th, and Parker went like 28th or something like that.
George Hill, Kawhi Leonard.
Yep.
Splitter.
What other players are finding, or their teams are finding players this late with such regularity from different, like you said, from different parts of the world. It's part of it is they know they were the first to catch on to the European thing, and part of it was they were forced to find other places because they didn't have the high draft picks that the other teams had.
Well, the other thing they're good at, and that this is something that I think is Danny. I think Danny Ainge is a good drafter. This has been his one weakness as a GM. They're really good at finding guys who didn't make it on another team. Like Danny Green. I forget what team Patty Mills got drafted by. It wasn't San Antonio.
He played for Portland. I know that.
Yeah. But it's, Matt Bonner. Danny, going way back, like Danny Ferry, Antonio Daniels. Like this team, Bruce Bowen. This team has a really good sense for how to look for somebody who didn't quite fit in somewhere else, and then go grab them, and they just know exactly how to use that person when nobody else could figure it out, which I think is its own. When you combine that with the drafting, that's how you're able to stay relevant. They haven't had I don't think they've had a top 10 pick since Duncan.
No, I don't think they've had a top 20. I know they traded for Kawhi Leonard, but yeah, they haven't had any draft. They're always drafting.
Kawhi Leonard was the last lottery pick, and he was like 13th or something like that. Do you buy? So I picked Popovich for Coach of the Year. I had Jeff Hornacek a close second. I thought he was amazing. Yeah. And then I had Carlisle over Tibbs for the third spot. What would have been your 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, I wouldn't have went with Carlisle. I think that Popovich, he should just have the Coach of the Year every year. That's just should be
eligible.
Yeah, I would give it to Hornacek just because Popovich is obviously the best coach, but I don't know. I think that it just doesn't even seem fair to include him in there. Yeah, I wouldn't have Carlisle. I would take a couple other coaches ahead of Carlisle, I think. I'm actually not a big fan of what Dallas has done this year. Especially late in some of these games. Look, you talked about their roster. Their roster is obviously flawed.
Yeah.
But I felt like, I don't know I haven't been impressed with what they've done late in games,
It's a fair point. They have been a little Adelman-ish.
He did something 3 or 4 games ago. I can't remember which exact game it was, where they had a situation where there was like 26 seconds left in the game after a timeout. The other team was on offense in a 1-possession game. And he's got Jose Calderon out there playing defense. And that to me is just, you need to make an offense for defensive swap there. You had timeouts. There was going to be a situation where if you got the ball, you could call a timeout, bring in someone else for free throws, bring him back in for free throws, bring in Devin Harris for defense. So I didn't like that. They collapsed in a few games.
I went to one of them against the Clippers. I think they blew they blew a huge lead.
Yeah. I don't know if part of it is just he's got this roster and he must just be exacerbated. And he started out as a defensive coach. Remember the teams he had, Indiana and Detroit. Yeah. They were about as grinded out on defense as. I
just think that roster's terrible. Like you look at everybody's making excuses for Kevin Love why he probably isn't going 500 again. It's like if you switch Kevin Love and Dirk, would Dallas win even one more game? But then if you put Dirk on Minnesota with everything else he brings to the table and the leadership stuff and the professionalism, I feel like they might be better, Yeah,
well, the roster is terrible, but Dirk is basically a guy where if you have him with a bunch of decent players, you're always going to be in the playoff hunt. That's how good he is. People really sleep on just how good he is offensively. And he's not that bad. People think he's bad defensively. He's not bad defensively. He's tall and he's tough to shoot over, and he's tough in the post, and he does a good job of boxing out and getting rebounds.
He went head-to-head with Durant. What was that, 2 weeks ago? I love that. That was one of my favorite games.
He's, in the last 5 minutes of the game when you need a basket, I picked him as number one. I wouldn't want anyone else on offense other than him. Now, Durant would be in there, obviously, but Durant's kind of the obvious choice.
Yeah.
But I would actually, in a 1-possession game, last shot situation, I would rather have Nowitzki than Durant, because Nowitzki just has the confidence. He knows he's been there before. He's got a wide array of moves that can work. Whereas I think Durant hasn't really been taught properly. Durant's go-to move at the end of games is like taking a long jumper. It's not backing a player down. Yeah, or not even follow it, just standing at the 3-point line, dribbling. Their late game offense is terrible. But my other coach for Coach of the Year, I would put Doc Rivers in there. Look at the job he's done with that team. Chris Paul goes down. He's got the players believing the crap he's selling. That DeAndre Jordan's the second coming of Bill Russell.
I know. He's not.
Yeah, no, he's not even, and he's a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year.
No, not true.
What that's done is it's given him the confidence. It's given DeAndre the confidence, and that's coaching. That's what coaching is about. You don't have to talk. There's some coaches who coach through the media in a negative way, like Phil Jackson used to do that. He used to coach through the media in a negative way to get his team motivated. Doc's doing the opposite. He's building his team up through the media.
And he changed Blake's career by giving him the freedom to freelance and rebound and go all the way up the court without dumping it to Chris Paul, and just kind of unleashed him.
An interesting thing to do is to go back over the last month of the season and count how many times Chris Paul actually brings the ball up the court and how many times Blake Griffin brings the ball up the court, and then wonder who's the point guard, because usually Paul gets the rebound from someone gets the rebound, gives it to Paul, and Paul just quickly passes it to Blake, who brings it up the court, and that's done a lot to help Chris Paul stay healthy, get less fatigue come late in the season, and it's also it's improved Blake's ball handling and ability, and it's made the Clippers a dangerous team. Now you have to guard a power forward in transition. That puts a lot of effort on the other team's defense to defend for the entire game.
You've been known to gamble from time to time. You do not like gambling. You do not like gambling on the playoffs, which I always think was an interesting.
No, I like to gamble on the playoffs. It's just there's less of a grind. It's there's only 2 games a night, maybe sometimes 1 game a night. Once you
don't have the same advantages in the playoffs, though, right?
You do and you don't. It's the real advantage for my career in gambling was just the number of games I could have a choice to bet on.
Yeah.
Whereas the playoffs, you don't have that. But the playoffs do present. I mean, I've had some really good. My best opportunity bet ever was the 2007 playoffs, where I bet the Warriors to beat the Mavericks. you have situations like that. Last year I had a great spot where I just thought Indiana was far and away the better team versus the Knicks. That was, I think, at plus, I forget, but I think it was at 2 to 1 or 2.5 to 1 or some price like that. So there are spots like that come up for sure. But it's just, there's so few of them. There's, if you really like a team in a series, you're going to get like 4 or 5 or 6 games to bet them. So I do bet the playoffs for sure. And
so give us a sleeper then. Is there anybody you're looking at that you feel like might be undervalued as we head into this final week?
The problem with giving out sleepers is that when you give them out, they're not sleepers anymore.
It's a great point. Well, how about this? So, I'll email you right before the playoffs, and you give me the sleeper, and I won't tell anybody.
Well, there you go. I will. I mean, what I do is what I did last year, and I'll probably do it again this year, is after I get my bet down for the amount I want to get, I'll give it out I'll this team. If I like a series price, I'll usually I don't say I always will, but I did it a couple times last year. I gave out the Indiana play on Twitter, just for fun, and that worked out all right. I can do that more in the playoffs just because there's the playoffs is a bigger market, and it's a lot. It's and I'm not really betting as much as I used to begin with, but I'll bet more in the playoffs for sure, just because it's kind of exciting, and I'm still at heart someone who enjoys having a bet on a game and watching it. So
I know that feeling. I want to talk about 2 teams, and then we'll go. 2 teams that I find very frustrating from a coaching standpoint, and you're the only person I know who gets more irrationally frustrated with coaches than I do, and we probably both play it up too much. But the Oklahoma City. First of all, if they lose that Spurs series in 2012, I think Scotty Brooks just gets fired. But now he's there 2 more years. Is there a more frustrating coach of a 60-win team that you could remember?
No, there really isn't, and it's almost sad. It's because the team is so good that, and I think when he was coming up, when he first became the coach, I think he was the right type of coach for that team because he was always positive. He had, he built a good culture. He got the players involved. But now I don't know who a good coach would be for that team because there's just so few, the really good coaches are coaching for the most part. And I don't know what coach could come in but he's terrible in the end. I mean, their big end of game play that they run is they spend 14 seconds posting up, trying to get Durant a ball in the post for some reason. He gets the ball in the post and then backs up 5 feet and does an ISO. And that's their end of game go-to play.
You don't like that play?
It's nice. I don't like that play. And then the lineups that he plays, I'm not a big Scotty Brooks fan at all. I think what
crunch time lineup would you play if you were them?
Well, I don't even know about the crunch time lineup. I just don't see the point in playing Kendrick Perkins the minutes that he plays at all. So
me neither.
It's goofy that, remember the year they went to the finals, they basically started Kendrick Perkins and played every game at a deficit until Kendrick Perkins came out because Miami was playing Shane Battier at the 4 or LeBron at the 4.
Yeah, it turns out playing 3-on-5 is a disadvantage when you're in the finals.
Yeah, and there's some teams where Perkins is necessary. I don't mind playing him against the Spurs. I don't mind playing him against the team, back when the Lakers were good and they had Gasol and Bynum. I don't mind that. Against Memphis, I don't mind it. But against some teams, it's just you have to adjust in some ways. So there's that. There's the idea that they don't have any offense at all. They're so gifted offensively that they can basically score with running ISOs and one-man games the entire game. And that's a testament to Brooks or to Westbrook and Durant. But I would like to see them run some side pick and roll with Durant and Westbrook. I don't think anyone could stop that. And I don't know maybe we're not giving him enough credit. Maybe he's just saving that for the playoffs. I would run
that play every game. I think the big mistake he makes during the regular season is he didn't try to develop some of the ancillary guys. Like Jeremy Lamb was this guy who just stood in the corner, and eventually the team just stopped guarding him, and then he either had to make a 3-pointer or he couldn't, and then he went in a slump and he became useless. Like, they didn't run plays for him ever. They never run plays for Ibaka. He's just this guy who he's supposed to stand in his one spot, and if he is lucky enough to get a pass to him, he does it. Like, he hasn't developed his game at all. And at some point they're going to need those guys, but it's just always Westbrook or Durant. And it's like, either if it's going to be that way, then just be that way and just run the pick and roll with them 80 times in a row.
Yeah, and then he's got the ghost of Caron Butler and Derek Fisher playing all these minutes.
I know. It's not going to work, and that's not going to work. I don't know.
Fisher's actually done well for that team. He's actually played well. He's hit.
But you can't play them both. Like you can't live in a world where both of those guys might be on the court for you in a big playoff game.
Well, that's the other thing is that he also will have minutes where he plays neither Westbrook or Durant, which to me is just insane. I mean, if ever there was a reason, it doesn't make sense. So we'll see what happens in the playoffs. They certainly have. When
we talked about ceilings earlier. That's a team like in that Clippers game when they actually play defense, and both of those guys are going, and Westbrook's feeling it. It's a scary team. You do not want to see that team.
Yeah, that was the best defensive game I have seen them play in probably months. They played so good defensively in that game.
They were flying around. It was all because of Westbrook. They feed off Westbrook, and when he's got that attitude to him, he had 50 people there at that game and was staring him down, but when he has that little swagger to him, it really affects that team positively. But
yeah, I believe that for sure. And then having Cobble back is huge as well. That helps them as well. Helps their defense as well. And I think even having Perkins back in some ways helps their defense for whatever reason. So
the one good thing that with him. And I noticed this in the San Antonio game, the beginning of the third quarter, because that was a close game when San Antonio was going for the 20th win. He got in that little thing with Duncan. He just shoved him and then tried to get into it. And Duncan was laughing, but at the same time, nobody messes with the Spurs like that. And Perkins can take that stuff too far a lot of the time. But I did like seeing somebody not treat the Spurs like, it's like your brother that you totally respect. I like seeing somebody stand up to him and try to start stuff with him.
And Durant is such a good person, and he's such a good player, and he's soft spoken. He's not really, he doesn't have that assassin mentality. And I think that having someone like Perkins around who's got a permanent scowl might help him in some ways, might help that in some ways. But I'm not a huge Scotty Brooks fan. He's the worst coach of all the coaches that are, I think he's the worst. Of all the teams that are gunning for the playoffs right now in the Western Conference, there's three coaches that are at the very, very bottom. And it's him, Jackson, and Jaeger. Okay. Those are the three coaches that will not help their teams in the playoffs.
Oh, Jaeger.
Jaeger's terrible.
Yeah, I thought you were going to throw McHale in there as the third one.
I don't have a problem with Kevin McHale.
Okay, good.
I mean, I don't see. I mean, look, he's not. Their fourth quarter offense is not spectacular, to put it to be very kind. It's not a very good fourth quarter.
That's offense.
An offense. But it's also not as if McHale is doing things with substitution patterns or I mean he's their offense. Yeah, it struggles in the fourth quarter. But I mean, Kevin, I'd rather have a coach who does less and maybe isn't as good versus a coach like Jaeger who inherited a great team and decided he was going to turn them into a running team. I mean, how brain dead do you have to be to have that Memphis Grizzlies team with Gasol and Randolph and decide we're going to run and play run a motion offense and really move the ball a lot quicker? I mean, that's just ridiculous. And then playing Tayshaun Prince all these minutes when he's clearly the worst of the four guys they had an option to play over him.
Yep.
So yeah, I'm not a Dave Jaeger fan at all. I don't know what it is that, I mean, he's succeeded at every level he's coached. He's won championships at every level, but he looks like a combination of lost and overconfident, which is really a bad combination of being lost and overconfident at the same time. So no, I'm not a Dave Jaeger fan.
Couldn't you describe Mark Jackson that way too, though?
Except for but yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I would say so. But Mark Jackson doesn't really strike me as overconfident so much as he just strikes me as like positive about life.
Yeah.
So it's not like he talks about how great he is. He's just always talking about his team, and he's pretty good at motivating the team. I think in some ways his huddles are actually really. I like watching his huddles. I know he's a preacher. He wants to be a preacher. He was a preacher. That to me is like his life calling. I'm not sure about this whole basketball coach thing, but motivational speaker / preacher / yes man seems to be something that Mark Jackson would excel at.
Last night they showed one of the huddles during the Denver game. It was great. He's like, "Hey man, we earned this. 6 minutes to go. Meanwhile, they look absolutely terrible, and Timothy Mozgov is having a career night. Jackson's in there. Hey, we earned this. This is where we want to be. It's like, are you watching this game? You're gonna get double out rebounded.
Yeah, I guess I should also add, in addition to preacher, motivational speaker, great point guard, because he was a great point guard. So I should add that. Give him credit for that. But coach, I'm not so sure about.
Yeah, that Golden State team. You saw it again last night. I just get a weird vibe from that team. And the fact that they don't take care of business in these home games, especially like last night. I mean, you're on TNT. This Denver team just wants to get like the 8th pick or the 9th pick or whatever pick they're going to end up with. And you get annihilated on the boards. Mozgov, you can't shut down Mozgov. And it's really hard to take that team seriously. Just is.
It is. It's such an exciting team too, that you want them to do well, because I just love watching Stephen Curry play. I described that the last shot that Curry hit that didn't end up being the game winner because Fareed hit the game winner. Yeah, that's what I love about basketball. That was pure improvisation. That was unscripted, and it was as close to art as basketball can get. I compared it to listening to John Coltrane or Miles Davis go off on a jazz riff, because it was just that was nice. So I want to see that team in the playoffs. I want to see them do well, but I'm not terribly optimistic that they will. We'll see. Who knows? Maybe they'll have an injury or two that'll allow them to play their optimal lineup, and that'll help them.
They had the Harrison Barnes just stinking this season problem, and we rely way too much on Draymond Green problem, and it always seems like we have to fall behind before we start playing the way we should have been playing problem. And it's too bad. They've certainly been involved in more fun games this season than just about anybody except for Phoenix.
They would be, if you were to take if imagine how exciting that team would be if Hornacek was the coach of that team. How much fun that would be! The most exciting team to watch probably in recent basketball history. That team.
Yeah, he would just go small and run and gun the entire time, right? It'd be 130 points a game.
They would shoot 33 pointers, 35 3, and it would just be you wouldn't. I mean, they're running post ups at end of games for Jermaine O'Neal, and it's absurd the type of offense they're running. But
he's running an offense like that's from the late 90s.
He's running the offense he ran for the New York Knicks. Right. When they played the Indiana Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah, Bogut, you're going to be Ewing? Yeah. Like what? No, that's not right. All right, cool. This was good. I feel a little more prepared, and we have the playoffs coming up, and we're going to have to figure out a way to have you come on during the playoffs without giving away any secrets.
We'll definitely be able to figure that out for sure.
All right, and give your Twitter handle so people can follow it.
It's Haralabob, which is just how it sounds now. It's Harala, B as in boy, O-B, at Haralabob on Twitter.
Check it out. He has some good tweets, and occasionally he gets upset, and all of a sudden he just starts jacking up tweets like Stephen Curry at the end of the game.
Yeah, I've got a.
You're a volume tweeter.
I am a volume tweeter.
All right, thanks so much, Bob Voulgaris. We will talk to you during the playoffs.
Target percent off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.